I'm David Boraks, and you're listening to Charlotte Talks on 90.7 WFAE Charlotte. Today we're taking a look at development in Uptown Charlotte, and specifically the rapidly changing area of South Tryon and Stonewall streets. My guests are Michael Smith, the CEO of Charlotte Center City Partners, which promotes development in Uptown. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
Also, Ashley Fahey, who covers development for the Charlotte Business Journal. Hello, Ashley.
Hey.
And Ed McKinney is with us. He's from the Charlotte Planning Department. He was also the former interim planning director. Hello, Ed.
Good morning.
We want to talk today about the boom in uptown development, especially what's happening around South Tryon and Stonewall streets. It's an area where I used to work in the 1990s when I was an editor and reporter at the Charlotte Observer. There were very few people living downtown then, and apart from a few places catering to the office crowd, dining was limited. My colleague Doug Smith of the Charlotte Observer used to make a joke about going out to find a candy bar uptown, especially after 5 o'clock, and there was no place to go. Our neighbors at the Observer, around the Observer, were a couple of auto repair shops, so that gives you a sense of where we've come from here. But then something happened. We might start with the Convention Center and the West End Hotel on Stonewall in the late 1990s. In the mid-2000s, Wachovia and later Wells Fargo led development of the Arts District there that's now known as the Levine Center for the Arts. That includes the Mint Museum uptown, the Beckler, the Gantz Center, and the Knight Theater. At the same time, the Duke Energy Tower was being built, and all of that stuff opened around 2010. It's hard to believe that's only 8 years ago. The same year, the NASCAR Hall of Fame opened, and so did the Duke Energy Center. Altogether, they changed the face of South Tryon Street, and in the same way that the Blumenthal Center for the Arts, Performing Arts Center, and other developments changed North Tryon Street in the years before that. So after all that happened, other office towers followed. Romare Bearden Park opened in 2013. The minor league baseball Charlotte Knights moved to the BB&T ballpark in 2014. And what's happening now is continuing the trend, maybe even at a faster rate. So I'd like to start with Michael Smith of Center City Partners. Is this latest round of development at the south and west end of Uptown something that flowed naturally from these earlier developments? When we were talking earlier, you mentioned the redesign of 277. What's going on here?
Well, there's a handful of things that are contributing to this, but private development responds often to moves by the public sector. And that public-private partnership that occurred for the Levine campus, the Levine Avenue of the Arts, the Duke Energy Center developed by Wells Fargo, the Beckler, the Gant, the Mint, all those moves showed the commitment of this community to South Tryon. And then you get those big infrastructure moves like redesigning 277, creating diamond exchanges, which created new land down Stonewall, and it created new opportunities. And the private sector responded with what is in demand. And the beauty of it is it all occurred during a cycle that's been very balanced across all parts of real estate, across hospitality, across residential, and across office.
Say a little bit more about I-277 redesign. I mean, it on the one hand, there's a chasm there between downtown and the South End area. On the other hand, it did create some opportunities.
Yeah, 277 has been both an enemy and a friend. To a city that's a secondary size city, it created a development constraining factor, which gave us more density. Yet now, as we've gone from kind of a two-dimensional to three-dimensional downtown and begin to fill out to the edges, it becomes a little bit more of a moat. And we're doing what we can to think about how do we reduce that barrier so that we can spring across into the south end, spring across to the north and to the west. To get a little wonky, what happened with 277 is they were cloverleaf exchanges, which takes a lot of land. And when those were made more efficient, it created land that the state and the city could work together on. And the city did a great job on an RFP, which brought in some really creative developers to help us create new things as we march down Stonewall towards Midtown.
That's really interesting. So what you're saying is that new land was created that was owned by the government, and that gave them an opportunity to decide what happened there. Does that sound right, Ed?
Absolutely. I mean, to go even further, to talk about the intentionality of the design. So you go to the history of this corridor, you know, the 74 corridor, essentially Stonewall back in the day was the highway that went through Uptown. 277 Independence became the 1950s, 60s version of that, freeways. they had unintended consequences, right? The ramps that Michael talked about created this disconnect between the automobile and the pedestrian environment and the activity we're trying to create in Uptown. And that most recent transformation now is how do you rebalance? How do we take advantage of the access that 277 provides for development, but do it in a way that balances the automobile with the pedestrian, creates these development sites, but then is intentional about those sites. It's not just about development. Let's make sure that then they're walkable, that they're building to blocks, that they're creating what could be, one of our great streets in Uptown, Stonewall. So we've been very intentional about what that form should look like and how we really want the development to address the street and the nature of that development in the long term.
Can you give us a little bit of history about how zoning and planning in that part of town have affected this? What was it originally, and what has changed? What did the city put in place that has helped to create this opportunity?
Well, again, long term, you think about what this was a highway corridor. You mentioned earlier, you had auto repair shops there, and the reason was because back in the 40s and 50s, this was a highway. So that has transformed as the nature of Uptown it really became the vision for our center city and the mix of use that we wanted. Back in the 80s, we put in place our zoning for Uptown that would really shape mixed-use development and get the intensity and development that we want. But at the same time, the infrastructure was that disconnect of the infrastructure was there. So we continue to be intentional about what the plan should look for. We added some layers to that in terms of thinking about the Brevard Street corridor and the Stonewall Street corridor, ensuring that when we set up these sites, that we guaranteed we got ground floor activation, that we guaranteed that we got good urban form, that we were thoughtful about the design of the street so that we had streetscapes and multimodal facilities designed with them. So it's been an evolution of our zoning and our transportation infrastructure and our vision to ultimately make sure that when these opportunities came along, that we had a really clear sort of intention and expectation of what we wanted development to do.
So all of these pieces that we're describing have created the situation right now where, Ashley, you've written that there's $3 billion of development underway just in one section there of the mile of Stonewall Street. I think at one point there was 1,200 apartments in 3 blocks that were on the drawing board, and some of that stuff is now coming to fruition. What else is in the picture here that's causing us to have this environment right now?
Well, I think in the beginning of this cycle, you saw, especially on that corridor, a confluence certainly of residential. We saw a number of apartments that are still finishing up, but among them, Crescent Communities' Stonewall Station project, which included several hundred apartments. Northwood Raven is finishing up on their project at Stonewall and Caldwell, and then Prophet Dixon Partners is also doing an apartment project on Stonewall. But now you're starting to see other uses come into play. Certainly, Portman Holdings out of Atlanta delivered 615 South College in 2017, and now Lincoln Harris and Goldman Sachs are leading arguably the biggest project with their two-block holdings, and they're going to be doing more than 2 towers, but right now there's 2 towers underway, one of which is anchored by Bank of America. The other one, which just got announced last week, is going to be anchored by Deloitte. And then, beyond that, you've also got Duke Energy, which, has been talked about for some time. I know they acquired that lot last year for almost $30 million, the lot between the Gant Center and St. Peter's Church.
Right on
there,
South Tryon.
On South Tryon, right off of Stonewall. So, and they're going to be doing a major thing. Not only are they consolidating a lot of their employees in Uptown into one building that will be 1 million square feet, but they're also going to be putting 2 very high-profile sites on the market.
Well, I want to take a tour of some of these projects in a minute, but one last question about the big picture here. How much has the economy played into this? And I would go back to 2008 when the economy was in the tank and nothing was happening. Did that create an opportunity for us to take a deep breath and take a look at this? And how is the economy right now affecting it?
certainly the economy is driving a lot of this. You're seeing a lot of the companies that are already based here in Charlotte are experiencing organic growth. The office market is very tight right now in Uptown. It has been for several years. Now, of course, with some of these real estate moves, you're going to see some big blocks coming online, certainly. And that will be interesting to see what would happen if when the economy does experience a bit of a recession. But yes, I would say growing companies need more space. They need, they want the best for their employees as far as amenities, as far as, certain types of office space. So that's fueling a lot of the demand for new office space rather than, dated, arguably, office space. That's certainly a big trend we're seeing. But, it's also that, return to the mixed-use urban environment, which we're certainly seeing in this cycle. And I know that's been sort of an overstated trend, but it certainly is happening. And a lot of employers are moving out of the suburbs back to Uptown, et cetera.
Another aspect is this notion of the redesign of the interchange, the opening up of those 5 parcels that were government owned. You don't have that opportunity very often. So having that land available, proactively marketing that land that was a really unique part of the timing of this on this corridor.
And I guess the government is not under the same financial pressures as somebody who paid a lot of money for a lot to do that. Michael, you're talking to these folks all the time as we recruit businesses and developments. Is the economy part of this picture?
Absolutely. And the beauty of all this new office coming online and then some new lots opening up and maybe even space opening up in some of our A-, B+ buildings is there's a correlation of about 1-to-1 of job growth to new office space. And we've seen that cycle after cycle. So what this means is we're creating the infrastructure for job growth and vitality. And I love this move to more and more mixed use. We've seen $40–50 million worth of renovation to legacy towers, taking them from pretty singular use office to a mixed use environment. A couple of great examples. 300 South Brevard, the old AT&T building, the Bank of America,
Bank of America Plaza.
The Plaza building, incredible with Eddie V's at the base. These are big moves by our city, and what's happening is there's been a real connection made between retail and lease rate of office space. And we've seen a couple examples lately where a tenant was being recruited and they actually brought their retailer into the sales pitch. That's a new day for us.
Interesting. We actually have a comment on our website from Jack, and he's wondering about the status of Brooklyn Village and what will happen to green space in the Uptown area with all of this development.
That's an interesting question. Certainly Brooklyn Village is a project that's long in the making and arguably still has a long way to go. So the group that's working with the county on that is still in negotiations. But the plan for that, and partially contentious plan, a part of this plan is the removal of Marshall Park. And that's been talked a lot about at the county level as the development group has gone through negotiations and talked about their vision. But what the group has said before, and it's the local group is Conformity Corp., which is led by Monty Ritchie, and then there's also a New York developer called the Peebles Corporation that's involved. And so they're heading this project. But what they've said is, we want to have sort of pocket parks throughout. We want to have smaller green spaces that are programmed and activated, but they don't necessarily want one major, central park, if you will. Now, there will be, according to their plan, there will be this portion of it in the middle that is green space. But the whole thing about it is just programming.
Well, that's Ashley Fahey of the Charlotte Business Journal. We're talking about Uptown development. We need to take a short break. You're listening to Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
Support for Charlotte Talks comes today from WFAE members and Atrium Health, serving the Carolinas in specialties like heart, cancer, and pediatric care. Atrium Health, dedicated to promoting better lives through better health. And artist Herb Jackson, whose paintings and drawings are represented in Charlotte by Hydell Brooks Gallery. Additional information at herbjackson.com or hydellbrooks.com. Coming up Thursday on Charlotte Talks, Greg Gerald and his wife Helms are a white middle-class couple that chose to move into a high-poverty, primarily African-American neighborhood to begin a ministry and hospitality house. In developing relationships with their new neighbors, they were forced to confront questions of race, privilege, segregation, and economic opportunity in their West Charlotte neighborhood. Guest host Sarah D'Elia sits down with them and one of their neighbors about forging connections across differences. That's when Charlotte Talks, Thursday morning at 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
Thousands of coal miners suffer from black lung disease, a fatal condition caused by breathing toxic dust. A new NPR News investigation shows that their deaths went unchecked by businesses and regulators who knew the risks and failed to act. Despite the warnings, why was this allowed to happen? Next time on 1A.
That's coming up at 10 following Charlotte Talks on 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
This is Charlotte Talks on 90.7 WFAE. I'm David Boraks in for Mike Collins. We're talking about the transformation of Uptown Charlotte today, and especially all that's happening on the south end of Tryon Street and along Stonewall Street. We'd love to hear your comments. You can email charlottetalks@wfae.org or search for WFAE on Facebook and Twitter. And my guests today are Michael Smith, the CEO of Charlotte Center City Partners, Ashley Fahey, who covers development for the Charlotte Business Journal, and Ed McKinney of the Charlotte Planning Department. Ashley, I'd like to paint a picture for listeners of exactly what's going on in this area, maybe looking at some of these projects quickly. Let's take a quick tour. Let's start with that intersection of South Tryon and Stonewall Streets. The first one that we talked about earlier that opened in 2010, along with the Art Center there, is the Duke Energy Center. And how important was that and the Levine Center to making things happen here?
Certainly critical. You know, anytime you have a major employer like Duke Energy anchor any sort of office building, I think certainly that spurs a lot of ancillary development, at least interest. Of course, when that building delivered, so did the recession was full underway. So certainly there wasn't going to be much development going on there. But as we came out of that and entered into the expansion we're still in today, you did see a lot of developers say, okay, there's opportunity here, especially looking towards South End, the transformation that's certainly gone on across the bridge there from 277. And so I think a lot of developers said, okay, well, there's certainly opportunities here to do, whether it's apartments or hotels or office buildings. And we're seeing all of that right at that intersection. At Lincoln Harris's site, which I alluded to earlier, the Legacy Union site, Bank of America will be moving into its new office tower there in early 2019. And they're taking 550,000 square feet, which is substantial. And then before that's even done, Lincoln Harris is already underway on another office building.
Right. Back to the Duke Energy Center. We know that Duke Energy is in there. What else is in that building?
Lots of tenants. So Wells Fargo is in there. They, obviously were the driver for that building. You also have Deloitte, which is moving over to Legacy Union in 2020, late 2020. And then you've also got, I think, KPMG is in there. Barings was in there, but of course now they have their own tower. But yeah, you're seeing a lot of tenants that are growing pretty rapidly in that building. So I think what you're seeing is they're wanting more space, they're wanting to expand, but then there are companies in there that say, well, I need space too. And so they're sort of jumping into these new towers. And that includes the 650 South Tryon building.
Because Wells Fargo owns the building, and they're a third of the tenancy. Duke's about a third as well.
Mm-hmm.
That same block there, of course, there's the Mint Museum, and then since 2010, the museum tower has been built. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so that was originally going to be a condo tower. And of course, with the changes and sort of preferences for, millennials, that's been talked about a lot in this trend. And, just the condo market in general has not been what it used to be. So Childress Klein, which built Museum Tower, they decided to make that an apartment building. And we've seen a ton of apartments come through in this cycle, not just in Uptown, but in the suburbs as well. And so they made that a high-rise luxury apartment building. And the Museum Tower opened, I think, last year, and certainly adds that residential component to that intersection.
How is that doing as far as those apartments go?
Extraordinary.
Very well, yeah. So
Set new high water marks for rent rates.
And what are we talking about?
Well, some go into the tens of thousands per month. I would not say that's the average by any stretch, but that's certainly the higher end.
I think it's about $2.75 a square foot.
And how does that compare to elsewhere? I mean, what is a...
Well, rents right now for apartments, I would say For most of the, Uptown product, I would say it's around 2, maybe a little bit higher. South End, you're seeing 175 to 2. So certainly that's on the upper echelon, I would say. But it's the demand is there. It's not just these millennials who are renting. There's a lot of baby boomers who don't want to live in a huge house in South Charlotte anymore that are moving into Uptown that are renting these properties. You're just seeing a lot of different kinds of new renters that maybe we didn't see in past cycles.
Got to say, the thought of having an apartment and not have to mow my lawn or take care of my house is pretty appealing.
It's an attractive lifestyle. More than half of the apartments that are under construction right now are being built in Center City.
Wow.
And in this decade, we're going to have 3 times as much. We're going to have more than 600% growth, and it will be more than we've seen in the last 3 decades combined.
Well, let's go across the street, across Stonewall Street, to the old Charlotte Observer site where I once worked in the bunker there. And that building, we always figured that was ripe for redevelopment at some point. Mm-hmm. It was August 2017 when Lincoln Harris and Goldman Sachs announced plans for what's now called Legacy Union. And as you mentioned, they are under construction on one tower, and they've just announced another 18-story tower. Mm-hmm. Give us a kind of a big picture view of what that whole block will look like.
Yeah, so of course, Lincoln Harris and their partner Goldman Sachs have been pretty mum on details, but the intention is certainly to do mixed use, certainly to do probably hotels, apartments down the line. Right now I think they're focusing on the office component, just speaking to the demand right now in that market right now in Uptown. So once these two come out of the ground, we'll just have to see what comes up next. But there's been conversations with a lot of joint venture partners to do all kinds of things. The site is big; it's 10 acres, which if you think about it in an Uptown perspective, that's enormous. And it's 2 contiguous blocks, which again is significant and can't be overstated. So we don't really know exactly what they're going to do in the future, but they've alluded to doing a lot of density, a lot of mixture of uses. Again, would not be surprised to see hotel, high-rise apartments, et cetera, in future phases.
You just pointed out it's 2 contiguous blocks. The back block there, if I'm looking from South Tryon Street, goes across Church Street to the block that's right opposite the Panthers Stadium. Mm-hmm. Do we have any sense of what might go there sometime? Is there anything in the works?
So, yes. I mean, I've talked to Lincoln Harris a lot about this, and they say we're always in conversations with the Panthers. They're right next door. And Johnny Harris, who is the chairman and CEO of Lincoln Harris, was a minority owner of the Panthers at one point before David Tepper came in. We don't know exactly, again, what they'll do. But what the Panthers will do eventually with David Tepper now being the owner, he's talked a lot about having some kind of entertainment district, having some kind of fan type development around the stadium, and that's been seen, as my colleague Eric has reported on, that's been seen in a lot of NFL cities that we don't have right now in Charlotte. So whether that happens at Legacy Union or on the other side where the playing fields are or practice fields are today, we're not sure yet, but certainly that's on the table and something to look forward to.
In your article about this Deloitte going into this new tower there, you said that Deloitte had been looking at the future of work with their own clients, and that caused them to look at their own needs. What is that all about? What do we mean by future of work, and how is that informing a decision by a company like this to move into a new building? Well,
as everyone knows, the unemployment rate right now is very low. So the war for talent has been talked about a lot, but it is a reality, and a lot of companies, they're having to get really competitive with how to attract and retain employees. And a lot of people say, the biggest expense, if you will, or the biggest investment a company can make is in their employees, but second to that usually is real estate, whether it's a building they own, whether it's their space they lease, whatever. So what you're seeing companies do today is they're spending a lot more per square foot on their space and doing all kinds of new innovative things. Technology comes into that a little bit, but they're doing all these kind of new different things to attract millennials and then Gen Z following it. And right now, again, as I said, the labor market's so tight that in order to keep good talent, good employees, you have to do certain things like offer certain amenities. It's not just a ping pong board or ping pong table necessarily, but certainly things that employees enjoy and will lead to them having an, enjoyable work environment. But what that means for each company or each industry can vary certainly very much. But definitely emphasis on technology, definitely emphasis on having, interesting workspaces.
Well, Ed McKinney of the City Planning Department, another question about this new 18-story tower that was announced recently for Deloitte. It requires a zoning approval because of its design. It's got some kind of... Can you tell us about that and what's required and what the prospects are for that?
Yeah, so that actually just came up with in front of City Council for hearing this Monday, and it was again they have back to the zoning. This site, the 10-acre site, has our Uptown mixed-use zoning district on it, so it allows all the things that we've just been talking about. But we also have some rules around setbacks and things, and this building, interestingly enough, wants to do a pretty innovative design. It sort of cants out as it goes higher up.
Cantilevered, kind of leaning out a bit.
Sort of leans out kind of at an angle, and it's pretty unique for Uptown, and it's a very innovative design. But it also kind of hit one of our rules about setbacks in the street, so it did have to go in front of council.
Because of the
Monday.
bend in Tryon Street, it would look right up Tryon. That's
Yeah, it'll
Oh, you want that office.
yeah, back
it
to
responds to the street.
and back to the employee experience. I mean, that'll be a really great building to be in with some great views, partly because of that design.
So was that approved, or that's moving through?
the way process it was actually a unique process. On Monday night, I went to a hearing, and then the same night, because of the timing of this project's actually in development now, and they had the option to do sort of the more traditional version or this version, and they put it in front of council both for a hearing, and they decided on Monday night. So it was approved. I think it'll be a really great addition. It goes back to the notion of it's not just about development and the numbers. It's about making some really innovative design, both in the architecture, but in the experience that we see on the ground. This project, we back to open space. I mean, the 10 acres that Lincoln Harris is doing, we'll have open space as part of it. We'll have some very high-intensity active street retail around that open space. So there's some really interesting things that you can do when you have a site that's that large.
Let's float across South Tryon Street now to the other corner there, where Ally Financial has announced a 26-story tower. Ashley, what do we know about that project and where it is?
Yeah, so that one has been in planning for a very long time. It used to be called Tryon Place, and I think a lot of people sort of know it as that. Crescent Communities is leading it, and they signed on Ally, I guess, sometime last year. And as part of this, Ally is going to take most of the building for sure, but as part of this, they're also doing a hotel. And the hotel flag was confirmed earlier this year as the JW Marriott, which is being built right next door by White Lodging, which is a group out of Indiana. And they have done a lot of, I would say, convention center style hotels. The one coming here is not a convention style JW Marriott, but they've had experience doing very large, very significant, I guess, types of hotels. And so having that JW Marriott, I think, is also pretty substantial because it's directly adjacent to the convention center. It's, again, not a convention center hotel, but it is going to have a lot of amenities. It's going to have a lot of the things that some hotels here have, but we haven't seen in a lot of the new hotel development necessarily. I guess the Grand Bohemian may be one exception to that. But and so they're going to be on the same block, and Crescent and White Lodging have talked a lot about, having them very integrated, having them sort of interact very much with each other. So, yeah, I mean, that's, again, another very significant project on one city block.
Now, Ally occupies space over on Church Street right now, and they've got about 1,700 employees. Are they moving out of that building, or are they consolidating from other locations?
Yeah, so they're going to be moving out of that building and consolidating from other locations in Charlotte. I think they have 2 other offices in Charlotte. And so, again, as I alluded to earlier, there will be some big blocks that will be coming online in the next couple of years. And some of our second-generation towers, ones that were probably built 2000s or earlier. And so it will be interesting to see, what sort of backfills in that space and where the office market goes when those come online.
Let me zoom back out to a big picture question, Michael. A lot of these new developments are proposing hotels, and it sounds like some of them are actually landing operators for these hotels. Is there this much demand? Is it related to the convention center? What's going on?
Well, RevPAR is this measure of daily occupancy and average daily rate. And that went up every month for about 7 years. And during that period, from like 04 to 14, we only added like 380 hotel rooms. Well, we were so ripe for more development. We're at about 5,000, 5,200 rooms right now, and there's 10 active hotel projects. This will grow our number of hotel rooms in the center city by north of 70%. And we still continue to see great moves on average daily rate. So this market was ready for it. And that pairing of, a great employment center with great hospitality is what we aspire to achieve in this next cycle.
The Republican National Convention is coming here in 2020. Will some of these new hotel rooms be ready by then?
I think some will. There's 2 underway with the novel Stonewall Station project, and Crescent's not developing that. They have sold their parcels to 2 other developers. Those are coming online. That will be Home 2 Suites by Hilton and an Even Hotel. And then the JW Marriott will not be ready, but Grand Bohemian, I believe, will be.
Where is that one?
That one's over at trying to remember the exact
Church and Trade.
Yeah, Church and Trade next to the Carillon building.
Okay, right. Yeah.
They're hoping they can slip it in. You can tell
Yeah.
they're racing for that date.
Yeah, they're adding a floor a week, it seems.
All right, let's continue our walk real quickly here. So on the southeast corner of that intersection of Tryon and Stonewall is the Gantz Center, which is this very narrow building, and next to it right now is a parking lot. We learned recently that Duke Energy, which bought this property last year, this parking lot, is going to build a 39-story office tower there. Their plan is to sell this to somebody and then lease it back. What's going to happen there, and why are they doing this arrangement with the lease and the sale and lease back?
They've done that before. This is a pretty typical structure, I think, for a lot of major companies. It's essentially a build-to-suit. They want a very specific, I'm sure, type of building. They want a very specific developer. They worked with Childress Klein to build the Duke Energy Center, and they're working with them again on this one. It's not a very atypical move in real estate, again, with a major company. They don't necessarily want to be in the business of owning real estate, especially one of that caliber. So they would much rather just be in a lease structure. And again, as I noted earlier, another very significant part of this is that they are selling and putting on the market 2 very prime sites in Uptown.
Right. So they're moving about 3,600 employees in there. That's a huge number. They are going to be moving out of their former headquarters on Church Street. I think they're in what I call the old Wachovia building, right? And then there's a building next to the convention center. A couple of those, or one of those is a leased building. The other 2 are buildings that Duke owns. They're going to sell those. More prime real estate that's ready for development. What could happen on those sites? What does the market need?
That's certainly something for the market to decide, I think. But the location, again, cannot be overstated. I think what's especially interesting, though, is the one they own on the same block as the Convention Center Hotel, the Convention Center site has been earmarked or looked at by the city as possibly an option for a Convention Center Hotel, which has been sort of in discussion for a long time at the city level. I'm not sure yet when that might occur, but it's certainly a site they've been looking at.
Let's back out a minute and quick question about parking from Janetta on the website. Please discuss the loss of parking space and the drastic increase in parking rates that comes with all this development. What is going to happen with this, and is the city able to do anything? Ed.
So as the development comes along, a lot of these projects are providing for their parking as part of the mixed-use development. We have we have innovative standards in our Uptown mixed-use district that allow a lot of sharing, that allow a lot of joint use of parking. Parking's a dynamic that's going to, I think, what we see from the industry is going to change pretty dramatically in the next few years, and I think a lot of developers are even wondering themselves about what they need in the long term, and we'll be looking at some innovative ways in our ordinances moving forward about maybe getting out of the way of parking and really letting the dynamic of that happen with where the market needs to go.
I mean, in the case where a parking lot is turned into a skyscraper, development of a parking deck usually goes with that. I think, just to use the Duke Energy's proposal there, I think that's going to have several levels of parking at the bottom, right?
So what's interesting about this, though, is parking is this fundamental asset. It's the end of the road infrastructure.
We'll come back to that in just a minute. We have
Great.
lots more to talk about here, and we'll take your comments after a short break. You're listening to Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Tyndall Subaru Gastonia, featuring the new Outback with eyesight safety technology that sees problems and initiates action to help avoid trouble. Details at tyndallsubaru.com and on Facebook at Tyndall Subaru. And from Blumenthal Performing Arts, presenting the Very Merry Holiday Special with Broadway hits such as Falsettos, Hello Dolly, Cats, and A Bronx Tale. Parking included, tickets at 704-372-1000. A multi-year investigation by PBS's Frontline and NPR reached devastating conclusions about an outbreak of advanced black lung disease affecting Appalachia. Their investigation found that the federal government failed to respond to warning signs ahead of the outbreaks. even though regulators were urged to take specific and direct action to stop it. Coming up in 20 minutes on 1A, host Joshua Johnson will take a closer look at that. Charlotte Talks continues in a moment here on 90.7 WFAE.
All Things Considered on WFAE keeps you informed as the Charlotte region continues to change and grow.
Last year, Huntersville had the highest percent of school-age children who make up more than 20% of its population. Another reason municipal leaders are pushing for more schools. Charlotte stands at 17.4%.
All Things Considered, weekday afternoons from 4 to 6:30 on 90.7 WFAE.
This is Charlotte Talks on WFAE. I'm David Boraks, sitting in for Mike Collins. We're talking about Uptown development today, and we were just talking with Michael Smith of Center City Partners about the parking situation, the loss of parking to new towers. Michael, you were mentioning what's happening with that.
Yeah, David, your listener's so correct. This issue of parking is one that we have to be so intentional about because we've got a math problem where you'll have a lot that parks, a surface lot that parks 350 cars. You build a building there, you occupy it at 7 or 8 per thousand, and you park it at 2 per thousand. Well, you do the math quickly, and you have a parking issue where you're creating more demand and you're not addressing that demand. We're going to have more and more of a modal mix where we have more people carpooling, coming in on van shares and using our rapid transit system. But there's got to be a bridge between the two. There's a group of us right now that are interviewing consultants that will be a part of our next Center City plan to think about how do we be intentional about the parking we need. Because Ed's right, there's massive technology disruption that's occurring at the same time. But where do those two meet?
The discussion about parking reminds me of a presentation I saw from Brent Cagle, the head of the airport, who showed plans for all these new parking decks, and they're all pretty much there now. There's massive amounts of parking around the airport. But he also showed a future plan where some of those parking lots go away as hoped for development of mass transit out to the airport changes the parking picture there. Are we talking about that happening uptown as well?
Boy, that's soothsayer kind of thing, Ed.
I'll be optimistic as a planner and say yes. I mean, we've talked about all this development now this morning and haven't mentioned essentially the station itself. So all of this development sits around the Stonewall station, the convention center station, and if you think about it, this station probably in the holistic view of this corridor is probably the most intense. You can get off that platform and walk immediately into a grocery store, into housing, into a
one of the best TOD
hotel,
examples
into
we
the
have
convention
in the
center.
Southeast.
Yeah, I think we actually, it's probably the most overlooked station in our system.
TOD being transit-oriented development, the idea of thinking about this as a place where many of the people who live there, work there, shop there will be coming by transit.
Absolutely, and we're just with the expansion up to Unit C Charlotte this year. I don't think we've even fully seen the value of that system, and all of this development is part of that. And transit is a big part of this, and the way people live and the people that will be moving into these units and working in these offices are folks, many of which probably won't even want a car and won't need to park and will live and be able to shop and work and do all that within blocks.
Yeah, developers talk a lot about parking, and of course, it's one of their biggest expenses. $25,000 at least per space in a structured parking deal. But right now, employers still want a high relatively high parking ratio to make sure employees can park. But certainly, there've been a lot of conversations about what to do with parking decks when we've got more autonomous vehicles, more people not using cars to get to work.
Well, let's continue our tour. Of course, a lot of this is all happening right around the convention center, which has been there for a while, but there are plans now for expanding, adding a hotel. Michael Smith, what's going on with the plans for that?
Well, it's exciting. We formed the Stonewall redevelopment. We organized a Stonewall collaborative of 40 partners, and one of the major partners was obviously the convention center. And as Stonewall began to redevelop this way, they pivoted in their design thinking to think, what kind of edge do we want to create on Stonewall? And what they were addressing is the new demand for breakout meeting space. The convention business continues to change. They did a great study and identified what does the next generation of the convention center want to look like. It's a $110, $112 million renovation. But they're creating a new edge on Stonewall, which will be a great complement to all the private sector development that's occurring on the south side of that street.
So we're talking about expansion of the convention center itself, maybe this hotel, and this is a city project, right, with private developers.
This is a city-driven project. There is nothing about a hotel at this point. That is hopefully a long-term aspiration, is another convention center hotel, because for us to be competitive with the cities that we compete with for guests, that has become a best practice.
So the current, what's on the plans currently is a $115 million expansion, right? What are we getting for that?
Let's jump in together. I mean, it's new breakout meeting space, it's modernization, it's new technology, it's the old thinking of hotels and meeting space was create a dark box and let everybody customize it.
And there's a walkway across Stonewall Street, right?
That's one of the things we're really excited about is both there will be the rail trail, which is this incredible public amenity that has about 1 million guests a year through the south end. It's about 4 miles long, and it's an urban greenway, but it terminates right at 277 because that bridge was value engineered out of the Blue Line, went back in 2005. Well, that bridge is now funded to come across 277 to the Stonewall Station, and now with this project with the CRVA at the Convention Center, it will then go across Stonewall, eventually going through the center so that the rail trail system goes all the way north.
What's the timeline for this project?
So we are selecting engineering firms right now for the pedestrian bridge. So think probably 2021 kind of opening. And I don't know the timing for the convention center.
About the same. I would have to check. About the same. Well, and the unique part about this too, it's not just a bridge. Back to this notion of design and what the place we're trying to make here. It's that bridge is actually going to be a public space. It'll be thought more of as a plaza. It'll have a really unique view down Stonewall, a la kind of the High Line experience in New York. So it's thought of as a public space. It'll be a really unique added amenity to the corridor, and it also ties to a bigger vision we have about connecting Stonewall from Irwin Creek Greenway to the Little Sugar Creek Greenway with the street design. So we're working with CDOT and our other partners to essentially have a multi-use trail connection that'll get you from the two major greenways using Stonewall as that corridor connecting you to the transit station. So there is a really unique set of layers here of open space, people, multimodal connectivity that's a really unique feature of all the development that's happening.
Well, continuing our tour, go across from the convention center is the Novell Stonewall Station development. We talked about that earlier. It's got the Whole Foods in there, some new retail, apartments, and some of those are pretty pricey as well, aren't they, Ashley?
Yeah, I love to think about the penthouse, which again is not the average by any stretch, but the penthouse leases for $15,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Going down Stonewall a little farther, there are a couple more projects that I believe are open now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's the Savoy and Uptown 550. Where do those stand?
So those are finishing up. At the Uptown 550, which is Northwood Ravens project, there's a high-rise and a mid-rise component, and those have slightly different price points. As you can probably imagine, the high-rise, slightly nicer finishes, higher rent. Mid-rise is still going to be pricey. You're still looking at around that $2 a foot, maybe a little bit more probably with the new construction. And then the Savoy project, which is Prophet Dixon's project, just, I guess, east of it. That's coming online too, finishing up. And those are, again, leasing at what you would expect for Uptown apartment rates, a little bit above $2 a foot, but it's all kind of relative. It all kind of varies. The mid-rise versus high-rise certainly plays a big part into that rental rate. But
all right, let me lob a hand grenade into the conversation here and ask this question. We're talking about some really nice apartments that are going for rents we mentioned from like $1,200 to $15,000. Where's the affordable housing here, and why isn't there any? Maybe I'll start with you, Ed.
It's a good question. It's a it's a challenge that we've had throughout the city, right? It's not just an Uptown question; it's a city question, and we're approaching that in lots of different ways. That's a whole nother topic in terms of how we do that. I think, for example, where the partnerships align, and using Brooklyn Village as a good example, that is one where the county is working with that developer to commit to, I think it's 10%. Affordable housing, and that's a significant project. That's I think over 1,000 new units on a 10 to 15 acre site, part of this corridor. So it's where we can find the partnerships with the public, where we have a stake in it from a public side. I think we're getting it, and we're continuing to see that in projects. But it's a challenge that's we face in other places that aren't always easy solutions. We just find where we can find really clear partnerships where we've got land and willing partners.
Michael Smith?
I think the key is the commitment that we've made as a community, and it is going to take a all member of the team kind of approach. I'm proud of the what we've just done to the Housing Trust Fund, raising it from $15 million to $50 million every 2 years. I'm proud of what the Foundation for the Carolinas is raising with that $50 million fund. Where we sit now at the studio, these two blocks have set as a major guiding principle that affordable housing will be a part of these two blocks.
On North Tryon Street here.
Yeah, and we're going to, every time there's publicly owned land, every time that we have an environment that is connected to good jobs and transportation, we need to be having a conversation about this. But we can't build our way out of it. The answer to affordable housing is not new construction. I mean, the biggest creator of affordable housing is NOAA. It's naturally occurring affordable housing. It's older projects that are well maintained that are still in demand.
In spite of that, do you envision a time when one of these new apartment towers might go up and there might be units reserved for people at lower incomes?
I think you'll only see that if you have inclusionary zoning, honestly.
Which is illegal in North Carolina.
Which is illegal in North Carolina. Don't see that happening anytime soon in this state. And there's a big debate about whether or not that actually leads to a substantial amount of units, what impact that has on pricing. But certainly, yeah, I mean, when you've got the public side involved, that's when you can do the most, I think. And
like
as
publicly owned land.
Right, or some kind of city or government involvement. That's when they can sort of say, well, we'll give you this land for maybe a discount, or work with you to help with the costs of construction, so that we can get those commitments.
I think the discussion that's happening here on North Tryon is that we need to find places for people who work in the coffee shop or in the retail stores here to live near their jobs, just like folks who are paying a lot higher rents. And I guess that's something the city is working on. Maybe some housing trust fund dollars will go towards these projects.
Well, and again, mobility is about that as well. So, having transit access that's available for folks that live in all parts of our city to get to jobs. So we have to look at that holistically. That's part of the solution. It's not just the housing. It's also how you get to your jobs, and how do we provide, efficient and cost-effective ways to do that through transit.
Well, since we have Michael Smith here, yesterday you were at an announcement at the Avid Exchange up at the north end of Uptown, and they talked about
banner day.
Another big day. It's I think it's the third in 4 weeks that we've had big economic development announcements with a couple thousand jobs. What did Avid Exchange announce?
Avid Exchange announced the building of a new building with a development partner, spending, I think it's $43 million. And across the next 5 years, adding 1,219 jobs. This is exciting on its own merit, just that many new jobs. But what's great about this is Mike Prager is one of our own. This is a company that was created here about 18 years ago. It has a lot of local investment. It is a tech-related company. It is fintech, so it builds on something that's very natural industry to the Charlotte community, and it's great growth. It's 21st century jobs, and they're doing a nice job of recruiting. This thing was thoughtfully designed with partnerships with community colleges, great support from the state. They had choices too. They could have gone to a lot of other locations where they have jobs currently, but they grew at their headquarters.
Going back to where we started at the beginning of the conversation in the 90s. There were a couple of corporate headquarters here, some regional headquarters, but announcements like this one. Avid Exchange has its headquarters there and is beefing it up. We've had 2 other announcements in recent weeks from Honeywell, which is moving its headquarters from New Jersey, and Lending Tree, which is moving. And Honeywell, I think, Ashley, let me ask you this question. Both Honeywell and Lending Tree probably will be Uptown. Is that right?
Yeah, well, Honeywell won't say yet. They're going in the 300 South Tryon building, and temporarily.
That is where Bearings is as well.
That's where Bearings is, yes, and that's their temporary space. But I talked to the CEO during the announcement, and he talked great things about Uptown and South End. He's very excited about those parts of town, but they're still working through a negotiation with those deals. Lending Tree is another one that's been interesting. Doug Lebda, the CEO, has told me that they've looked at 20 different locations before deciding on Mecklenburg County. They were going to go to Pineville for a while. That didn't work out. But yeah, certainly the market has told me that they are looking to finalize a deal Uptown. The company won't say yet, but certainly we're hoping to get that finalized in the next couple of weeks. But, going back to all these economic development announcements, it's very interesting. It's been a very kind of tumultuous year, I would say, for economic development in Charlotte. We started the year off with the much talked about Amazon loss, Alliance Bernstein loss. We saw a couple other things with Babcock and Wilcox, and Family Dollar. Not great things that sort of were lamented on the economic development front. So I guess it's a really good thing that they're ending the year on a high note, and certainly a lot of things to look forward to with the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance merging on January 1st.
Well, thanks. Just one last question, which I'll throw out there. Alexander emails us that he likes all of the beautiful skyscrapers that are going up, but he still passes homeless people uptown. Does that figure into the equation about all this development? I don't know, Ed, what do we do about this?
Again, it's really with partnerships with all our social services, with Center City partners, with the county, the city. It's a continuing thing that we, is part of the life of Uptown, and we're all in it really to support the needs that we have, and really in partnership deal with how to help that need.
David, we see it as an urban issue. We've launched a group of ambassadors that are on the street, uniformed, trained, that are our first responders, trying to help connect those people with services.
Michael Smith of Center City Partners, with Ashley Fahey of the Charlotte Business Journal, and Ed McKinney, a planner with the City of Charlotte. This is Charlotte Talks on WFAE.